and welcome to our design project, Cultivating Resilience. We are representing the National University of Singapore under the Department of Architecture in the College of Design and Engineering. In our design studio, this studio consisted of 7 undergraduate students, including myself, Lena Altuemi, and 2 other presenters will be joining us today, Kaina Sutanu and Vedika Gupta. We have been guided by 2 superb staff advisors, Dr. Rosita Samsudin and Dr. Terence Tan, whom we are very grateful for as they have helped us produce our final multi-step community and ecological proposal for the town of Gilesville. Within our design project, the project was split into 3 different parts. First, focusing on the site context and site analysis in order for us, from the context of Singapore, to better understand the context of Gilesville and the overall Chesapeake Bay. We explored different mappings of land use, of nature, of all the different policies within the site, and this later branched off into a problem identification portion where we better identified the main issues on site and iterated different solutions. So a lot of behind-the-scenes work was conducted during the first 2 projects in order to come up with a very, very appropriate project for Gilesville, which takes up a bottom-up approach. And finally, we moved on to our final part, which explored our final proposed solution with various zoning maps, phasing maps, and site-specific prototypes, and a final master plan with a heavily community-driven design. And so we started all of this by thinking to ourselves how effective design for resilience must be a collaborative effort involving community voices at every single stage alongside professional expertise. And that's why we emphasize this bottom-up approach in design and how significant it is, especially for Gilesville's context. So in order to bring you to our site, we start from the Chesapeake Bay region and zoom into this wider Gilesville area, which we have used to explore throughout our site analysis. Thereafter, we zoomed even further into this little peninsula of Gilesville, where we actually applied our design iterations, and our final master plan focuses on this specific area. So we can start with our going through our various site analysis. So we started looking at land use at the larger scale on the left, and we noted how the marinas and the various complex branch roads make up a majority of the impervious surfaces across the wider Gilesville area. And at the same scale, we, on the right, show an overlay of the current water edge on the satellite view of 30 years ago, showing this very subtle erosion and changes of the shape of this peninsula, and especially at the sharper edges, which is what we are trying to target in order to reduce erosion and reduce these issues of marsh migration and so on. So moving on, we started mapping the sea level rise, again at the same scale, projecting short-term flooding and noting how mostly the marshy areas were susceptible to flooding, and then zooming in even more into Gilesville on the right to show how different flooding scenarios overlaid with the existing building use, and how the spaces most at risk, we noted, were the industrial and commercial buildings along the coastline. And these were some of the activity-generating spaces and the dining areas that were very significant for attracting visitors to Gilesville. Moving on, we also looked again at the zoomed-in scale of the different marshes at risk due to sea level rise. The projected marsh migration conditions are shown, and especially this specific areas inland, which are very much at risk of turning into unconsolidated shores. And then furthermore, we looked at different edge conditions within Gilesville, whether that was the edge conditions along the coast, looking at different private areas or marinas, or if also exploring the different edge conditions within the entire Gilesville Peninsula, where we noted how everything, or almost the entire peninsula, was privately owned. And therefore, we pushed for our design to also incorporate smaller scale interventions for private homeowners to adopt. So moving on, we looked to a few case studies. Now, we looked inwards to Singapore's case studies to learn from our own context and to understand what perhaps values can also be applied to the Gilesville context. And that is not to say that we're trying to explicitly bring over our own context to Gilesville, but that's just to learn from our own context and some of the better case studies over here. So first we looked at smaller scale marine enhancement tiles in Singapore's offshore islands, and the ecosystem services and the benefits to these additions to the typical wetlands, seawalls. and other artificial marine structures were noted. And besides biodiversity, the studies on these specific marine tiles revealed that in Singapore, they would also incorporate social aspects into the study. And that means using these marine tiles for educational purposes, which is what we hope to achieve in Gilesville. Moving on, we also looked at the historical aspect of marine structures in Singapore, which are called kelongs. And we noted how these kelongs are not only a space for fishing, but it's a space for community, for intergenerational bonding, and to learn about marine life. And we hope to bring some kind of multi-purposeful space to Gilesville, not necessarily in the way that kelongs are formed or in the space or structure, but in the same value as these kelongs. Briefly to state, we have also explored various existing studies on the Chesapeake Bay region in terms of literature review, as well as novel coastal resilience projects. And these many reference values were extracted from the literature review for these novel interventions, such as the aforementioned marine tiles. And furthermore, existing resilience codes from the existing policies, whether that's at the county level or the town scales, were also employed within our design. We're not going to get into detail, but we've also explored certain gaps in these codes, such as how we noted that perhaps historical and cultural spaces should be developed concurrently and connectedly with the natural and scenic spaces. So moving on to our community SWOT analysis, we have noticed that one of the main strengths of Gilesville is that they have very rich ecological and scenic resources. But there's this one key issue, which is the fragmented land ownership that I have previously talked about, where the majority of the land is privately owned. And through our design, we hope to introduce some smaller scale interventions that private homeowners can adopt, while at the same time preventing this risk of gentrification. And at the ecosystem level, we also noted that many portions of the watershed are already under conservation, and that's really great. And it means that we can also adapt our design to improve some of these already conserved spaces, such as the marshes. But at the same time, the swale systems are overwhelmed, and that means we have to come in and suggest some better designs to improve the swale systems within Gilesville. A few weeks ago, we also had a community meeting where we noted that one of the main hopes that the community had for Gilesville was to see their town as a model example of coastal and community resilience. That means they hope to see visitors come into the town and take something with them, learn something about coastal resilience once they leave. And therefore, our design tackles just that. So just to go over our problem statement, we noted that the main challenge in Gilesville is the increasing vulnerability of its waterfront community to tidal flooding, storm surges, and sea level rise. Historically, it was a hub for maritime culture and boat building. The challenge is now to balance cultural and heritage preservation with climate adaptation. So I'll be moving on to Kayena's part. She'll be presenting our overarching framework and the master plan for our design.
Thank you, Lena. So prior to creating our master plan proposal, we workshopped a framework to ensure that each stage was carried out effectively, and this ensures a successful outcome of our final design. With feedback loops that reinforce each stage to revisit policies and the continued maintenance of each phase, this allows for the replicability across the Chesapeake Bay. So this framework covers different elements across our color-coded themes, which is dine, farm, play, learn, protect. In our first phase, we look at policy and planning, and this involves assessing environmental conditions of the site, participatory planning, and providing incentives and workshops on a small-scale interventions. Our second phase involves the small-scale interventions, and this includes small-scale marine enhancements and enhancing of existing stormwater infrastructure, as well as the planting of vegetation along coasts. Our third phase, the large-scale intervention, this includes introducing breakwaters, coastline extensions, and retrofitting marinas with marine-friendly substrates. Lastly, we also scale up the aquaculture and the seafood branding within Gilesville. And phase 4, the monitoring and external partnerships phase, we look at harvesting materials for marine enhancements, allowing schools to assist with harvest and other processes, as well as universities to partner with the sites. Now moving on to a more detailed map of the circularity within our process and building on our framework. Here's a detailed chart to highlight how the ties between economy and material flow work. So from like the demolition of and excavation of materials into the programming and upcycling workshops, as well as using native plants as a form of enhancements to shore stabilization and improving ecosystems. This cycle incorporates so many different flows of people and resources. So this was a visualization of how we came across to look at all the different stakeholders and elements within our scheme. Next, starting to look at the rationale behind our master plan, using our existing framework, and moving into a spatial diagram, we start to map out the different areas that would benefit from our interventions and respond accordingly. Some of the key opportunities we identified include repurposing the existing schools, living seawalls, as well as foreseeing the current hardware shop into a future oyster center. This also includes marsh protection and the utilization of the private water edges and the marinas. So moving into our rendered master plan, the purple indicates key conservation and community buildings, and we will expand more on each intervention that we're proposing. So this is a more detailed master plan that includes the annotations of different interventions within our master plan. So this includes a pedestrian and cyclist paths with improved roadside swales, a naturalized Galesville Park, marsh stabilization and enhancement with a new boardwalk to be used for recreation, nature play that is integrated with the schools for the communities, and this includes a coastal play for all ages, the dining establishments integrated with circular harvesting and dining, as well as both small and large seawalls that are accessible to public, along with smaller interventions such as the marine tile enhancement zones. Now, moving into the first phase of our master plan, this is the activation stage using participatory environmental stewardship. So this involves coastline stabilization through marsh enhancement, as well as participatory planning at public parks and community centers. And as you can see from this diagram, a central spine down the primary road network and helps to enhance the drainage system and the pathway environment. In our second phase, this is developing more resilient infrastructure. This lasts for around 3 to 5 years. This stage, we look at the development of coastal trails and the installation of larger scale breakwaters. We also extend the drainage system and the pathway enhancements, as well as retrofitting the marinas with marine-friendly substrates, including the workshopping of upcycling, crafting and harvesting different oyster-related materials, and overall improving food systems for circularity. And this includes the community and bay to table initiatives. In our third phase, so the continued monitoring and increased recreational visits to the site. This phase is around 5 to 30 years. So with this phase, we promote the official offshore tours to help with tourism and increase participation for communities in and around Galesville. There's also an annual to triannual participatory workshop to help improve programs and activities, as well as the long-term monitoring of marsh restoration and breakwater interventions. So now we'll be moving into a more detailed visualization of our coast. This section, we can see through our interventions and programming, we hope to attract a variety of native birds, insects, and sea life, specifically the ones listed here that are more vulnerable and declining in population. This would in turn increase biodiversity and improve the ecosystem as a whole. Likewise, across the marshland, the native species are largely vulnerable and declining in population. So this will help to revitalize and stabilize our marshlands so that it can last longer in the future and provide greater returns for ecological benefits. This detail also shows how our marshland can be used for stabilization through the incorporation of hay fiber. And some of the other species that we want to integrate include fragrant plants, birds, butterfly, and wildlife attracting species. So now looking into a more inland network characteristics. So this is where cycling paths are retrofitted onto pathways to promote use of carbon light modes of transport. And this also helps to enhance the environment down the central spine of our master plan, using fragrant species that help to attract more vibrant wildlife and helps to create a more inviting streetscape. So here's a larger collection of our park planting palette, and this is curated as a very suitable palette for coastal parks, and this can be introduced to residents so that they can incorporate it into their public and private landscapes, as well as a residential planting guide that allows residents to also utilize these native plants with varying heights and flowering periods so that they can create their own microhabitats to foster biodiversity within their community. Now I will be passing my time to Ved, who will go over our community engagement and program initiatives.
Thank you, Kayana. So, for our vision for Galesville, we are aiming to engage and educate the community on climate resilience. Here, you can see a collage our team has put together to show how oyster farming and dining can lead to community engagement in terms of collectively, from start to finish, creating sea tiles to place on seawalls and private docks along our project site. This is able to foster a greater sense of ownership as well as pride in the community towards keeping the Galesville coast safe. Okay, so in this slide, we're able to see how when we actually aim to engage the community, we're able to get them to come together to partake in making these sea tiles, and we reiterate certain guidelines to ensure that the tiles are usable. And that is to have an organic shape, not exceed the volume of 1 cubic foot, as well as to have at least one flat surface for easy mounting purposes. Our group has also done a showcase on different components and potential forms that could come from it, as shown in top left corner of the slide. So in this perspective, we're looking at how we're able to cultivate relationships between the residents of the Chesapeake Bay area as well as the waterfront that they are able to inhabit. And essentially, once we have our sea tiles produced by the community, we aim to first mount them onto private dock walls, as shown in our perspective. And we also aim to see a 36% increase in the biodiversity of the Chesapeake Bay area, supported by 120 waterfront parcels, showing their 100% support towards this initiative. So moving on to how exactly we aim to look at this seawall, our solution solves the dual crisis of coastal erosion and habitat loss by employing ecological engineering. We replace man-made barren edges with a layered defense of communities' designed seawall tiles to specifically enhance surface area. Below this, a boulder revetment dissipates wave energy and provides vital subtidal refugia. This solution aims to increase species diversity at the coast and reduce destructive wave runup. This is a transition from static, destructive infrastructure to a dynamic, resilient, and life-supporting blue-green asset. So our solution for coastal resilience is a multi-layered, ecologically engineered breakwater. The defense starts with the primary armor rock layer designed for immediate wave energy dissipation, which protects the stability of the inner core. The subsurface includes a coral core and an integrated oyster reef, which acts as a scientifically targeted substrate to promote calcifying organisms for biological stabilization and self-repair. Next, in this perspective, you're able to see how our design achieves a coastal resilience through integrated community engagement and ecological engineering. We are aiming to construct an 8.5 acres of living breakwater with an initial target density of 5 oysters per square foot, projected to filter 43,000 tons of water daily. This represents a massive, quantifiable environmental service. Simultaneously, we prioritize resource efficiency by recycling 60 to 70% of timber from felled trees into two unique coastal playscapes. This not only minimizes waste, but physically connects the community to the restored ecology, demonstrating that active resource management and large-scale habitat restoration are the foundation for a resilient and curious community. Okay. In this perspective, our project demonstrates a clear commitment to both ecological function and community resilience. We are actively stabilizing 10 acres of critical marshland through enhanced planting, resulting in a verifiable 30 to 60% increase in biodiversity and the sequestration of 10 tons of carbon dioxide annually. This provides essential climate resilience. Simultaneously, we integrate the community with the environment through 1.5 miles of nature trails built to a barrier-free universal design standard. The key social resilience factor is our target of achieving 100% community awareness of the local environment via these accessible learning spaces, proving that robust ecological restoration is the foundation for an engaged and healthy biophilic community. And in our last perspective, we're able to show how our design creates a sustainable, resilient neighborhood by integrating green infrastructure with mobility. This plan delivers 3 miles of permeable greenways, achieving up to 80% runoff rate reductions to significantly minimize urban flooding. Our conversion of major culverts into vegetated swales provides greater than 50% removal rate for suspended solids and a 20 to 35% reduction in nutrient runoff. Feasibility is ensured through resource efficiency, as we are recycling 10 to 15% of felled trees into educational signage and deploying 3 bike shelters at key community nodes. So to conclude, we have a vision statement, which is to cultivate resilience, community input, and interactivity with nature. And those are embedded in our design using Galesville as a pilot project for approaches applicable throughout the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you.